An old man with memory problems was abandoned in the middle of a crowd at a football stadium with only a briefcase and a confused mind. But what he discovered when he opened the briefcase was terrifying. Rick walked slowly with heavy steps through the crowd at the stadium. The noise of people entering, the excitement of the fans wearing Arsenal and Liverpool shirts, everything seemed confusing to him. He looked around, trying to understand where he was. He knew his daughter Diana was with him, but how did he get there and where had she gone? People hurried by, fans rushing not to miss the start of the game, and Rick tried in all that chaos to remember something, anything that made sense. His hands trembled slightly as he held a small briefcase, the only thing that felt familiar in that frightening moment. Suddenly he heard Diana's voice, loud, almost harsh. "Dad, I can't do this anymore. I can't. You only cause me problems." She was standing in front of him, her face tired, her eyes distant. Rick, with wide eyes, confused, tried to process what she was saying. "What do you mean, dear?" he asked, his voice low and shaky. Diana shook her head, impatient. "I can't do it anymore, Dad. You don't remember anything. I've explained to you so many times where we are and what we're doing here. I can't take care of you like this anymore," she said, almost defending herself. Rick looked around, trying to find something that would help him understand the situation better. But everything was a blur. He felt that something was very wrong, but he couldn't figure out what. "Please don't leave me here," he begged, his voice weak, feeling tears burning his eyes. "I don't know where to go, Diana. I don't know." Diana avoided looking directly at him, took a deep breath, and without another word, turned her back and disappeared into the crowd that now seemed endless. Rick stood there, stunned, as fans passed by without paying attention, completely absorbed by the excitement of the game. The stadium, which before had just seemed noisy, now felt overwhelming. The voices of the people blended together, turning everything into an even more confusing whirlwind in Rick's mind. He tried to remember something, anything that would help him get out of that situation, but his memory was like a puzzle with missing pieces. Holding onto his briefcase tightly, as if it could somehow make sense of what was happening, he looked once more in the direction Diana had gone, but she was no longer there. Every sound seemed to make him feel more lost. The game, the stadium, the noise, none of it made sense. He barely knew where to start understanding what was going on. Breathing heavily, he tried to take a few steps, but his legs felt heavy as if his whole body was frozen by anxiety. Suddenly, the memory of Diana flashed in his mind. She was still there. She had to be. He turned quickly, his eyes scanning the area. "Diana!" he shouted, his voice trembling, desperate. "Please don't leave me here. I don't know what to do." "I need you, dear," he begged, now with a choked voice, tears welling up in his eyes. I don't know where to go. I don't know what's happening. Please, Diana, please, I promise I'll try. Just don't leave me here alone." The crowd around him kept moving in a hurry, not noticing Rick's pain. He stood there, not knowing where to go. It was as if, at that moment, he had been swallowed by an abyss of loneliness and forgetfulness. The sound of shouting and laughter, the smell of popcorn and soda, all seemed to come from far away, as if he was trapped in a bubble. He tried to remember what had happened, how he had gotten there, but everything was foggy. It was like his mind was a radio with static, memories fragmented, broken into pieces he couldn't put together. He rubbed his face with his hands, frustrated, trying to force his head to bring back a clear memory, but the effort only made him more tired. He closed his eyes, searching for something familiar in the middle of the confusion, but all that came to him were quick, disconnected flashes. A child's laughter, the sound of a door closing, the smell of coffee. Nothing that made sense at that moment. Feeling helpless, Rick looked at the briefcase in his hands. It was small, already worn out, as if it had been taken to many places over the years. He didn't know what was inside, but somehow he felt it was important. He held it tightly, as if it was the only thing left from his past. Maybe, in some way, it could help him remember who he was. Looking at the briefcase, Rick felt a wave of sadness. He knew he was alone there, completely isolated. He didn't know anyone, and no one knew him. And even worse, he didn't recognize himself. The stadium was full of people, but the loneliness he felt was immense, like an invisible wall separating him from everything around him. How did this happen? he whispered to himself, feeling the tears threatening to fall. How did I get to this point? He pressed the briefcase against his chest, desperate, searching for some comfort. The cold leather of the briefcase was the only thing that felt real, the only thing that made him feel like he still had some control. But no matter how hard he held onto the briefcase, his mind kept betraying him, leaving him adrift, with no answers, no memories. Rick looked again at the crowd around him, but this time with tearful eyes. He was there in the middle of thousands of people, but he had never felt so alone. Rick sat down on a random bench, his legs no longer able to support the weight of his body or his confused mind. He couldn't remember anything, only memories that came in pieces, quick and painful, like his mind was playing tricks on him. Suddenly flashes appeared. An image of him sitting at the dinner table with a younger Diana, laughing at something he couldn't remember. He tried to focus on the scene, but everything faded before he could understand. Then another memory came, a heavier one. Him, arguing with someone. The other man's voice was loud, accusing, but his face was out of focus, like a bad dream that doesn't go away when you wake up. Rick put his hands on his head, pressing his temples as if that could make the memories clearer, but instead they came stronger, with more confusion. He heard his own voice, younger, calling a name. Arnold. But who was Arnold? That name felt so familiar and yet so distant, like it was from a life he couldn't fully access. With his eyes closed, he tried to concentrate again. Another memory appeared. He was in an office, signing papers. There was a man in a suit beside him. Diana was there too, but her face looked worried, tense, different from the smiling girl from before. Suddenly, the memory disappeared, like smoke vanishing in the air, leaving only a trace of pain. "What is happening to me?" Rick murmured, feeling a lump tighten in his throat. Each new memory brought a piece of a story he didn't know how to put together, and it made him feel even more lost. It was as if his mind was playing a cruel game, giving him just fragments, enough to cause pain but never to give him answers. He opened his eyes, breathless, his breathing heavy. The stadium was still buzzing around him, but he couldn't hear the sound of the fans. Everything was muffled by the echoes of the past, by those disconnected memories that made no sense. And in the middle of it all, Rick felt a deep pain in his chest. It wasn't physical, but the pain of knowing he had lost something important, something he might never find again. "I need to remember," he whispered, his voice almost breaking. "But where do I start?" "Sir, are you all right?" asked a man in uniform, approaching slowly and leaning a bit to look into Rick's eyes. Rick looked up, confused, needing a few seconds to process what had been asked. In front of him was a stadium security guard, a tall man with a kind but worried expression. The badge on his chest said Benjamin. His voice was calm but had a sense of urgency. "Do you need help?" Benjamin asked again, more gently this time, seeing that Rick was clearly upset. Rick tried to speak, but the words came out jumbled. He felt his head spinning, as if the world around him was moving, but he was stuck. He took a deep breath, trying to gain some control over himself. I don't know," Rick answered, his voice hoarse, almost a whisper. My daughter left me here. I don't know where she is. I don't know what to do." Benjamin frowned, crouching down next to Rick to be at the same level, trying to understand better what was going on. He noticed Rick was holding a briefcase tightly. "Don't worry, sir. We'll sort this out, all right?" said Benjamin, with a kindness that seemed to bring Rick a little comfort. "Do you remember your name or where you were going?" Rick shook his head, still confused. "My name is Rick, but I don't know anymore. My memory, it's not good. My daughter, Diana, she left. She said she couldn't take care of me anymore." Benjamin nodded, trying to take in the information while looking around at the steady flow of people entering the stadium. He sighed, realizing that this man was alone, vulnerable, and completely lost. "Look, Rick, I'm Benjamin. I work here at the stadium and I can help you, okay? We can try to find your daughter, or if you prefer, I can take you somewhere quieter, where we can think more clearly. What do you think?" "More clearly? What do you think?" Rick looked at Benjamin with eyes full of uncertainty, but something about the security guard's calm voice and firm stance made him feel that maybe he wasn't completely alone. Even though his mind was in chaos, he nodded. "Thank you, Benjamin," Rick said, his throat tightening again. "I don't know what to do. I just know. I need to remember something. Something important." Benjamin gave a small smile, trying to give Rick some confidence. "Let's take it one step at a time, Rick. I'll stay with you until we figure this out, okay? You don't have to go through this alone." Rick, even though he didn't fully understand what was happening, felt some relief that he had found someone willing to help him. He held the briefcase tightly, but this time at least, there was someone by his side. Rick walked slowly next to Benjamin, still a bit shaky, but feeling a little safer with the security guard's support. The voices around him seemed more distant now, like the noise of the stadium was muffled by the comforting presence of someone who was there to help. As they walked towards a quieter area, Benjamin glanced at Rick, noticing the silence felt too heavy. It was clear that the older man had more to say, something stuck inside him, suffocated by all the confusion. "Rick, tell me something. Do you remember anything else? How did all of this start?" Benjamin asked carefully, trying to give Rick space to open up without pushing him. Rick stopped for a moment, took a deep breath and looked at the briefcase in his hands. His memories were still fragmented, like a puzzle where the pieces didn't fit together. Even so, he knew he needed to speak. He felt that sharing what he remembered might bring some relief. I was with my daughter, Diana," Rick began, his voice low, almost like he was talking to himself. "She brought me here to the stadium, but I think she didn't want me to stay with her." Benjamin frowned, not fully understanding. "What do you mean, Rick?" Rick gripped the briefcase tighter, his eyes fixed on the ground, trying to organize his thoughts. She said she couldn't take care of me anymore. I don't remember exactly what happened before, as my head." He put a hand to his forehead, as if trying to ease the pain that came with his attempts to remember. "My memory. It's been bad for a while. And now it feels like everything is slipping away." Benjamin looked at him with concern. "Your daughter, she left you here at the stadium?" he asked, trying to get the facts straight. Rick nodded slowly, the emotional pain becoming more visible on his face. "Yes, I think I've caused her a lot of problems. I can't remember things properly. I forget where I am. I forget what I'm supposed to do." His voice broke now and then, as if every word brought more frustration. "I know I didn't mean to hurt her, but I think she got tired of me." Benjamin moved a little closer, trying to show that he was there to listen without judgment. "And what about you, Rick? Do you remember how you lost your memory? Or what happened before that?" Rick shook his head, his gaze lost again. "No. I just know that one day I started forgetting things. First little things, then bigger things. Now it's like parts of my life are missing. I know there's something important I should remember, but I can't." Benjamin stayed quiet for a moment, taking in everything Rick had said. The situation was more complicated than he had imagined, and the man in front of him was clearly fighting a huge internal battle. He took a deep breath and placed a firm but gentle hand on Rick's shoulder. "Look, Rick, I know this must be hard, but you're not alone now. We'll figure out what happened one step at a time, and if you need help with your memory, we can work on that too, okay?" Benjamin said, his voice full of sincerity. Rick looked at him, his eyes tired, but there was a small glimmer of hope. For the first time in a long while, he felt like maybe he wasn't fighting this battle alone. Benjamin looked at Rick with a thoughtful expression, clearly worried about the old man's condition. After hearing the whole story, he knew something bigger was going on, and that Rick might need more help than he could offer right there, in the middle of the stadium. "Rick," Benjamin began gently but directly, "I think the best thing now would be to go to the police. They can help you find your daughter and figure out what really happened. They might even be able to help with your memory and get you to someone who can help." Rick, however, immediately shook his head, his eyes widening with a mix of fear and stubbornness. No, I don't want to go to the police," he said, his voice firm despite his shaken tone. "This is something I need to figure out. Something Something in my head. If I go to the police, they'll try to control everything, and I feel like I need to discover what's happening on my own. Benjamin was surprised by Rick's resistance. Even though Rick was confused, Benjamin could see there was something inside him that made him want to face this situation on his own, no matter how scary it was. "Rick, I understand you want to solve this, but what if it's dangerous?" Benjamin said calmly, trying to get Rick to reconsider. "Your memory is failing. Your daughter left you here without an explanation, and something tells me there's more to this story than we're seeing. The police can find a quicker solution." Rick took a deep breath, visibly shaken, but stood by his decision. "I need to remember by myself. I need to understand what's happening before it's too late. There's something important, I can feel it, and if I don't sort this out now, maybe I'll never be able to." Benjamin saw the desperation on Rick's face and realized that no matter how much he wanted to take him to the authorities, the man's need to solve this alone was real. Rick wasn't just a lost old man. He was fighting to recover something much bigger, something even he couldn't explain. The security guard sighed, accepting Rick's decision, though reluctantly. "All right, I understand. If you want to figure this out on your own, I won't force you. But I'm not going to let you wander around without direction, okay? If you don't want to go to the police, at least let me take you somewhere safe. We can think together about what to do next." Rick looked at Benjamin, and for a moment his stubbornness gave way to a slight sense of relief. He knew Benjamin was right to be worried, and even though he wanted to solve everything by himself, the idea of having someone with him wasn't so bad. I accept your help," Rick said with a tone of gratitude. "Just don't get others involved for now." Benjamin smiled slightly, a sincere smile from someone who really wanted to help. "Don't worry, Rick. We'll figure this out, and I promise I'll stay with you until we do." Rick gave a small nod. Even though he was hesitant to fully accept help, knowing he wasn't completely alone gave him a fragile but real sense of hope. Rick and Benjamin had moved away from the crowds, finding a quieter area where they could think more clearly. Sitting on a bench, Rick once again looked at the briefcase he was holding so carefully. Something inside it was calling him, a feeling that there might be an answer inside, a piece of this puzzle that seemed impossible to solve. "I think I need to open this," Rick said, more to himself, as his fingers trembled slightly while undoing the rusty clasps of the briefcase. Benjamin stood by, watching closely but not rushing him. He knew that any clue, no matter how small, could make all the difference for Rick. When the briefcase opened, the smell of old paper filled the air, as if time itself had been trapped inside. There were a few clothes carelessly folded, personal items that seemed ordinary, a toothbrush, an old wallet. But what caught Rick's attention was a yellowed envelope, hidden at the bottom, a bit crumpled. Breathing a little heavier, Rick picked up the envelope, feeling a chill run down his spine. He turned it over to examine it and, to his surprise, saw that the handwriting on the front was his own. That messy, familiar handwriting, but at the same time it felt distant, as if it had been written by another version of himself. I wrote this," he murmured, looking at Benjamin, who stepped closer, curious. "What does it say?" Benjamin asked, trying to see without invading Rick's privacy. Rick opened the envelope carefully, as if he was afraid of what he might find. Inside there was a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it slowly, his heart pounding in his chest, until he finally read the words written there, in his own handwriting. "Arnold is the key. Don't trust anyone until you find him." Rick blinked a few times, confused, and read the message again. He felt like the air around him had grown heavier. Who was Arnold? And why would he have written something so mysterious? The headache began to return as he tried to remember, but the answer seemed locked away in some distant part of his mind. "Arnold," Rick repeated softly. The name felt familiar, but it was just out of reach. "Who is Arnold? I don't remember." Benjamin stepped closer with a serious look. "This seems important, Rick. Maybe he's someone who can help you understand what's happening. It could be a clue." Rick nodded, trying to piece together the fragments of his memory. "I wrote this, but I can't remember why. That name, Arnold, it's in my head somewhere, but everything's so muddled." Benjamin, seeing Rick's distress, placed his hand on Rick's shoulder again, offering some support. "Let's take it slow, Rick. We've got a clue now. Let's figure out who this Arnold is. Maybe he can explain everything." Rick looked at the paper again, his mind spinning between fear and hope. That message, as simple as it was, carried something unsettling. He had written it, knew it was important, but couldn't remember why. All he knew was that finding Arnold was the next step. Rick looked at the envelope again, as if the words might reveal more if he kept staring. The name Arnold weighed heavily on his mind, and next to the name there was a scribbled address. Benjamin, who was still by Rick's side, noticed the address and leaned in to get a better look. "Does this place seem familiar to you?" Benjamin asked, keeping his voice calm, but paying close attention to Rick's state. Rick shook his head slowly, still confused. "No, I can't remember. But if I wrote this address, it's important. I need to find out who Arnold is." Benjamin realized that the best way to help was to follow this clue. "All right, then let's go there. If Arnold has anything to do with what's going on, he might give us some answers." Rick was silent for a moment, holding the briefcase like a shield. The feeling of uncertainty was still strong, but now there was something different, a direction. Even though the name Arnold was surrounded by questions, it was the only concrete thing he had to hold on to. "Let's go then," Rick said, taking a deep breath, trying to convince himself he was making the right choice. The trip to the address wasn't long, but the journey felt slow to Rick, as if each step brought him closer to something he feared remembering. When they arrived at the place, an old building with a worn facade, Rick stopped for a moment on the pavement, staring at it. There was a vague memory in his mind, something about the building he couldn't fully grasp. It felt like an uncomfortable déjà vu. "Is this it?" Benjamin asked, noticing Rick's distant expression. Rick nodded slowly. "I think so. I think I've been here before, but I don't remember when or why." Benjamin stepped forward, gently pushing the iron gate, which creaked as it opened. They entered the small overgrown garden and climbed a few steps to the entrance. The doors were slightly ajar, as if the place was used to unexpected visitors or perhaps neglected over time. Inside, the air was heavy, smelling of old wood and dust. The yellowed walls had stains from water damage, and the hallway was dark, dimly lit by weak bulbs. Rick hesitated for a moment, looking around. The place gave him a strange feeling, a mix of familiarity and discomfort. It was as if something important was about to surface from his memories, but still trapped in the darkness of his mind. "Let's ask about Arnold," Benjamin suggested, looking at a door at the end of the hallway. "Maybe someone here knows him." Rick, despite the growing fear, nodded. Every step he took toward that door felt heavier, as if he was getting closer to a truth he wasn't sure he was ready to face. When they reached the door, Benjamin knocked gently, and they waited. After a few seconds, the door opened slowly, revealing an elderly woman with curious eyes and a face marked by time. She looked at them for a moment before speaking. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice raspy but welcoming. Rick stepped forward, trying to find the right words. "My name is Rick. I'm looking for someone named Arnold. He lives here, doesn't he?" The woman frowned, as if trying to remember something. "Arnold. He used to live here. It's been a while." "Why are you asking about him?" Rick felt a chill run down his spine. The name seemed to gain more weight as the woman spoke. I'm not sure. I think he was important to me, but I can't remember clearly. My memory? It's failing." The woman studied Rick closely, as if trying to piece together the puzzle herself. "Arnold cared a lot about people. He talked about you, Rick. Yes, now I remember. He was worried that you might be in danger." Rick blinked, confused. The feeling of not remembering something so important was painful, like trying to grasp something slipping through his fingers. "Danger?" Rick asked, his voice trembling. I don't understand. Why would he worry about me? I can't even remember him properly." The woman sighed, leaning against the doorframe. She glanced at Benjamin quickly, as if looking for some support, but she knew the answer Rick needed was with her. Arnold didn't talk much, but when he mentioned you, it was always serious. He said he had to protect you, that there were people trying to harm you. He didn't tell me all the details, but you could see it was something big. She paused, thinking. I don't know exactly what he was protecting you from, but he talked about someone close to you. Your daughter, maybe. Rick's heart raced when he heard that. He knew Diana had left him at the stadium, but until now he hadn't been able to piece things together. Diana, Rick whispered, his daughter's name leaving his lips with pain. But why would he talk about her? She's my daughter. She wouldn't do anything to hurt me. Would she? The woman looked at Rick with sadness. Arnold was always careful with what he said, but he seemed convinced that your daughter was involved in something dangerous, and that it could affect you somehow. He said he had proof that he was close to discovering something important. Benjamin, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward, looking from Rick to the woman seriously. Did he leave anything here? Any proof, documents, anything that could help us understand this? The woman thought for a moment, as if searching her memory for a clue. He had a place where he kept important things. It was like he was preparing for something bigger, something he knew was coming. Maybe there's something there that can help. I can show you where it is, if you'd like. Rick felt a wave of mixed emotions. Part of him wanted to refuse, not believing that his own daughter could be involved in something that would put him in danger, but another part, more confused and fragile, knew that something was out of place, something he couldn't understand. And Arnold seemed to be the key to it all. Show us, please, Rick said, his voice now more determined, even though inside he was full of fear. I need to know what's happening. There's a place, Gani, she began, her voice soft and careful. Arnold used a small storage unit in an old building nearby. He said he kept things there that no one else should see, important things. He used to say that if something happened, everything would be there. Benjamin, always calm, stepped forward. Do you know how we can get to this place? If it's close, we can go now. The woman took a piece of paper from a notebook on a nearby table. She scribbled down an address with an old pen, the ink fading with each stroke. When she finished, she handed the paper to Rick. Here, it's not far, but the building's a bit abandoned, and no one's been there for a long time. I don't know what Arnold kept, but he always told me that if something happened to him, you, Rick, needed to know what was there. Rick took the paper with trembling hands, looking at the address as if it were the last piece of the puzzle. He still didn't know what awaited him at that place, but Arnold's insistence on protecting something only made his anxiety grow. Thank you, Rick said softly, looking at the woman with gratitude and deep uncertainty. Benjamin thanked her as well, and the two turned to leave the building. The walk to the storage unit was quiet, both of them lost in thought. Rick tried to make sense of what might be in that place and, more importantly, why Arnold seemed so worried about him. It felt like each step toward the unit was also a step deeper into his lost memories. When they reached the building, it was just as the woman had described. Old, with signs of age on the worn-out walls, broken windows, and an air of abandonment. There was a rusty iron staircase leading to a side door with a corroded lock. Sayati, looks like we're in the right place, Benjamin murmured, trying to open the door. With a strong push, it gave way, creaking loudly. Inside, the storage unit was dark and cramped. There were stacked boxes, old papers scattered on the floor, and everything was covered in a layer of dust. Rick looked around, feeling a heavy sense in the air. He knew something important was hidden there, but he still had no idea what he was about to find. Benjamin moved ahead, searching for something specific. After a few minutes of rummaging through the space, he stopped in front of a wooden box, older and sturdier than the others. It had Arnold's name carved into it, nearly worn away by time. He looked at Rick, who approached slowly, his heart pounding. I think this is it, Rick, Benjamin said, his voice low and careful. Let's see what Arnold wanted you to know. With a heavy breath, Rick opened the box. Inside there were documents, old photographs, and a worn leather notebook. The name Rick was written on the first page. He picked it up with shaking hands, as if he was about to open a door to a past he had forgotten, but that now seemed more real than ever. As he opened the notebook, the first sentence left him breathless. Rick, if you're reading this, It means the danger is closer than we imagined. Rick looked at Benjamin, his face filled with confusion. Arnold was investigating something, Benjamin said, reading over Rick's shoulder. He seems to have uncovered a scheme. Something big. Rick flipped through more pages until something caught his attention. A clear note, underlined, read, "Diana involved. Blackmail." Rick felt his body tense. His eyes darted across the page, absorbing each word with disbelief. Diana is being manipulated. Someone pressured her, and now she's involved in a blackmail scheme. She's extorting money in exchange for keeping old secrets. I need to protect her and Rick before it's too late. Rick closed the notebook for a moment, his thoughts spinning. He couldn't believe what he was reading. His own daughter, involved in something so awful. Blackmail. And more than that, Arnold, whoever he was, had been trying to protect him all along. Diana, Rick murmured, still processing what he had just discovered. Benjamin took the notebook from Rick's hands, flipping through the next few pages. Among them, he found an envelope. It was simple, without an address or name, but it was clear that it contained more information. He quickly opened it, revealing papers detailing the scheme. There were transactions, anonymous notes, and even photos that indicated secret meetings. "This is big, Rick," Benjamin said, looking at him. "It seems Arnold was trying to protect you from something much bigger than you knew. And Diana, she's involved somehow, but it also seems like he believed she was being manipulated." Rick remained silent, holding his head in his hands. The pain of knowing his daughter was at the center of all this was almost unbearable, but at the same time, he felt an urgent need to understand what was really happening. "Rick, Arnold wrote here that you have a large fortune," Benjamin began, his voice low but firm. "He was worried this would be used against you. It looks like he was trying to stop the wrong people from finding out, including Diana." Rick took a deep breath, as if trying to absorb the impact of those words. "My daughter," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't understand, Benjamin. Why would Diana do this to me? She's my daughter. She should be on my side, not against me." Benjamin looked at Rick, trying to find the best way to explain what was in the notes, as painful as it was. Arnold wrote here that Diana was being pressured. Someone manipulated her into doing this. He mentions that she started blackmailing Arnold for money. Maybe she got caught up in something bigger than she could handle and thought this was her way out. Rick turned more pages of the notebook, Arnold's words becoming clearer. He had been trying to protect Rick from something that was quickly escalating. Rick's fortune, which he barely remembered, was at the heart of it. The notes showed that Diana had begun extorting Arnold, threatening to reveal secrets that would put Rick in danger. "Diana used blackmail," Rick repeated, almost breathless, as if trying to make sense of it all. "But why? Why would she do this?" Benjamin placed a hand on Rick's shoulder, offering comfort in the midst of the confusion. "Sometimes people feel trapped, Rick. Diana might have gotten involved in something that made her think she had no other choice. But Arnold, he was trying to fix this. He was trying to protect both of you." Rick closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of disappointment, betrayal, and confusion. The thought that his own daughter could be involved in something so dark left him feeling lost. But at the same time, he knew he had to uncover the full truth. No matter how painful it was, he couldn't run from it anymore. "Arnold, he tried to stop this from reaching me," Rick said, his voice filled with pain. "He knew all along, and I don't remember any of it." Benjamin looked at Rick. "Now that we know this, we need to act, Rick. You have to face this truth, as hard as it is. Arnold left these clues for a reason. He wanted you to understand what was happening. And maybe there's still time to fix it." Rick nodded slowly, still processing everything he had just discovered. The name Arnold, once shrouded in mystery, now carried immense weight. He had been the one by Rick's side all along, trying to protect him from a truth that was about to tear his life apart. Rick and Benjamin left the small apartment with trembling hands and minds full of questions. Each step felt heavier, as if the truth was slowly revealing itself, but still far from fully understood. They headed towards the address mentioned in Arnold's notebook, a more distant storage unit, where he had apparently kept the final pieces of the puzzle. The walk was silent. Rick, still stunned by the discovery that his daughter was involved in something so dark, struggled to stay calm. Arnold's notebook weighed in his hands, a constant reminder that there was more to uncover. Benjamin walked beside him, ready for anything but respecting Rick's quietness. When they arrived at the storage unit, it was an old building surrounded by rusted fences. The front door creaked as Benjamin pushed it open, revealing a damp, dimly lit interior. Rick hesitated at the entrance for a moment, feeling the cold air, as if the place had been waiting for him for a long time. "This must be where Arnold kept the rest," Benjamin said, pointing to a row of cabinets and drawers at the back of the unit. "Let's take a look. Maybe we'll find more clues." The two of them started searching the place. There were boxes and papers scattered around, but everything felt chaotic, as if Arnold had hidden the information on purpose, trying to protect it until the right moment. After a few minutes of searching, Benjamin found a locked drawer. With some effort, he forced it open, and inside was a folder filled with documents. He pulled the folder out and opened it slowly, his eyes scanning the pages. As he began reading, his eyes widened. "Rick, look at this," Benjamin said, handing him the pages. Rick took the documents with trembling hands. They were bank transactions, detailed records of large amounts of money being moved. But what shocked him most was seeing Diana's name among the recipients of some of these transfers. Her name appeared alongside payments from people he didn't recognize, as if she were involved in a blackmail network much bigger than he had imagined. "My God," Rick murmured, his eyes moving across each line, his heart racing. "My daughter. She was receiving money from all of this?" Benjamin nodded gravely. "It looks like Diana was much deeper into this than we thought, and it wasn't just blackmail against Arnold. There are other people here, other transactions showing she was being used for something bigger." Rick squeezed his eyes shut, feeling the weight of the situation intensify. Once again he felt betrayed, but now there was also a sense that Diana was trapped in something bigger than herself. The evidence was all there, incriminating documents, illegal transactions, and his daughter's name tied to it all. "Arnold was trying to protect me from this the whole time," Rick said, almost to himself. He knew Diana was involved, but he was trying to save her somehow. He didn't want this to reach me. Benjamin agreed, placing a supportive hand on Rick's shoulder. "It seems like Arnold was fighting this battle alone. Now it's up to us to figure out what else he knew before it's too late." With newfound determination, Rick gathered the documents. He knew he couldn't ignore what he had discovered. As they continued searching through the storage unit, the atmosphere grew heavier with each discovery. They had already found incriminating documents, but they knew there was more. Arnold had been hiding something bigger, something they still didn't fully understand. Still shaken by the revelations about Diana, Rick approached a small metal shelf at the back of the storage unit. Hidden between some old boxes, he found a small metal case. It was light, and when he opened it, he saw a DVD. His hands trembled as he held the disc. The case was marked with a simple note: "Evidence." "Benjamin, look at this," Rick said, handing over the DVD. Benjamin quickly came closer, his eyes widening as he saw the disc. This must be what Arnold kept as his final proof. It might contain everything he found out about the blackmail scheme and about Diana. Rick swallowed hard, knowing this could be the final piece to understanding the whole story. But before he could say anything, the sound of footsteps echoed through the storage unit, heavy and fast. Rick and Benjamin exchanged looks, feeling the tension rise. "Did you hear that?" Rick whispered, fear growing in his chest. Benjamin stayed alert, bringing a finger to his lips to signal Rick to stay silent. The footsteps were getting closer. Without a word, Benjamin turned off the small light that lit the room and pulled Rick into a dark corner of the storage unit. "Someone's following us," Benjamin murmured, his voice low but urgent. "We need to get out of here, fast." Rick's heart raced. They were getting closer to the truth, but now it seemed like that truth had attracted unwanted attention. The footsteps grew louder, now accompanied by muffled voices. It was clear they were not alone. With the DVD tucked safely inside his jacket, Rick followed Benjamin, who began guiding him between the piles of boxes, looking for a discreet exit. They needed to escape, and fast. "They can't get this, Rick. This DVD is the key to understanding everything, Benjamin whispered while scanning the area, trying to calculate the best escape route. But before they could take a few more steps, two men appeared at the entrance to the storage unit. They were large, tough-looking men, their eyes scanning the place like predators hunting prey. One of them held a flashlight, sweeping the light across the room in search of any movement. "They must be here somewhere," one of the men said, his deep voice echoing through the space. "Search all the boxes. We can't let them leave with it." Rick felt sweat drip down his forehead. The danger was real, and he knew these men wouldn't hesitate to stop them from leaving with the evidence. Benjamin pulled Rick closer, whispering urgently, "Stay behind me. I'll find a way to distract them." With caution, Benjamin started guiding Rick through the shadows of the storage unit. They were getting closer to a side exit, but the men were drawing nearer, searching every corner, every pile of boxes. Suddenly, one of the men turned sharply in their direction. The beam of light from the flashlight skimmed just above their heads, almost catching them. "There!" the man shouted, spotting movement. Without hesitation, Benjamin grabbed Rick's arm and started running. "Go, run!" They sprinted toward the side exit, the sound of boxes crashing and shouts echoing behind them. The men were now in full pursuit. Rick, with his heart in his throat, followed Benjamin, trying not to look back. They burst out of the storage unit and ran down the empty street with the men's footsteps close behind. In a swift move, Benjamin turned down a narrow alley, pulling Rick along with him. They hid behind a pile of debris, trying to catch their breath as the footsteps of their pursuers echoed, growing fainter. "We need to get out of here," Benjamin said, panting. "But at least we have the DVD. This could change everything." Rick and Benjamin, not hearing anything more, ran down the dark street, their hearts racing, knowing the men chasing them wouldn't give up easily. The sound of footsteps mingled with distant voices, while the city lights flickered in the distance. When they finally reached Benjamin's car, parked in an alley, they jumped inside, breathless. "Quick, we need to get out of here," Rick said, his voice shaking with nerves, still clutching the DVD tightly. Rick and Benjamin, not hearing anything more, ran down the dark street, their hearts racing, knowing the men chasing them wouldn't give up easily. The sound of footsteps mingled with distant voices, while the city lights flickered in the distance. When they finally reached Benjamin's car, parked in an alley, they jumped inside, breathless. "Quick, we need to get out of here," Rick said, his voice shaking with nerves, still clutching the DVD tightly. "There they are," Rick shouted, pointing at the vehicles closing in fast. "Stay calm, Rick, we'll figure this out," Benjamin replied, keeping his voice steady, though tension was clear on his face. The cars were gaining ground, and Benjamin pressed harder on the accelerator, making their car fly down the narrow streets of the city. Every turn he took was risky, the wheels skidding, but he seemed to know what he was doing. Rick clung to his seat, his heart pounding in his chest. "They're getting too close," Rick yelled, glancing back to see the cars closing in. Benjamin glanced around quickly, searching for an escape route. He knew he had to lose them before things got more dangerous. He turned sharply left, entering a narrow street between buildings where barely two cars could fit side by side. "This is risky, but I know these streets," Benjamin said, trying to reassure Rick. "Trust me." The cars behind them tried to follow, but the narrow street slowed them down a bit. Benjamin took advantage of the gap and made another sharp turn, this time into an alley that was like a maze. The car jolted with each tight corner, and Rick felt every bump, but Benjamin didn't slow down. "We can't keep running like this forever," Rick said, panic rising in his voice. "What are we going to do?" Benjamin pressed his lips together and turned into another street, wider now. "I'll try something. Hold on tight." He pushed the car even faster, heading for a more open area with fewer lights. The cars behind them suddenly reappeared in the rearview mirror, faster now that they had more space. "Here they come again," Rick muttered, sweat dripping down his forehead. Benjamin, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, spotted a ramp leading into an underground parking garage to the right. Without warning, he yanked the wheel and sped down the ramp, making the car descend rapidly through the tight space. Rick held his breath, expecting the worst. "What are you doing?" Rick asked, panicking. "They won't expect this," Benjamin replied with a small, confident smile. The car dove into the underground parking, disappearing from view. Benjamin turned off the headlights as soon as they entered the dark garage, pulling the car into a shadowy corner. They sat in total silence. The cars chasing them zoomed past the entrance, speeding down the street without realizing what Benjamin had done. "Did it work?" Rick whispered, looking at Benjamin with wide eyes. Benjamin smiled slightly, still listening for any sounds outside. "For now, yes. But we can't stay here long, they'll come back. Come." Rick let out a shaky sigh of relief, the adrenaline still coursing through his body. They had managed to lose the cars, but he knew this wasn't over. There were still so many unanswered questions, and above all, the truth about Diana and Arnold remained hidden. "We need to find out what's on that DVD," Rick said firmly. "Arnold left us this evidence for a reason. This might be our only chance to understand everything." Benjamin nodded, restarting the car, but this time moving cautiously. "Let's get out of here and find a safe place to watch it. And Rick, be ready. The truth might be harder than we imagined." Rick knew there was no turning back now. They were getting closer to uncovering a mystery that was about to change everything. Rick and Benjamin, after managing to lose their pursuers, found a discreet hotel far from the busy streets. There, in silence, they prepared to watch the content of the DVD that Arnold had left. The revelations so far had been hard to bear, but Rick felt the worst was yet to come. They were on the verge of uncovering the whole truth. In the hotel room, while setting up the laptop to watch the video, the silence was suddenly broken by an unexpected noise. The door was kicked open with a loud bang. Before Rick or Benjamin could react, armed men stormed into the room. They were the same men who had chased them earlier, now standing in front of them, ready to act. Benjamin stepped forward, trying to protect Rick, but was immediately grabbed by two of the men and pinned against the wall. Rick, frightened, raised his hands instinctively, feeling the danger fill the room. Then, a familiar figure walked in. Diana. She was there, but different, with a cold and distant expression. Rick could barely believe what he was seeing. His own daughter involved in all of this, leading this dark operation. "Diana," Rick murmured, his eyes filled with pain and confusion. "What are you doing here? What's going on?" Diana stared at him for a moment, her face hardened. There was a coldness in her eyes that Rick had never seen before. She took a deep breath, showing no emotion, as if this situation was inevitable. "Stop, Dad," she said, her voice firm and controlled. "You need to stop investigating now." Rick shook his head in disbelief. "Investigating what? Diana, what are you talking about? We're just trying to figure out what happened, what you're involved in." Diana looked at him for a few seconds, the silence thick in the air. Then she made a gesture, and one of the men pushed Benjamin hard to the floor, pinning him down with a knee on his back. Benjamin let out a muffled cry but couldn't move. "If you keep going, he'll pay the price," Diana said, pointing at Benjamin. "I'm not joking, Dad. You need to stop now before it's too late." Rick took a step back, his mind spinning. He could hardly believe his daughter was threatening Benjamin's life. She, the girl he had raised with so much love, was now involved with criminals and putting others' lives at risk. The pain in Rick's chest was overwhelming, as if each word she spoke was a knife twisting in his heart. "Diana." "Why?" Rick whispered, tears starting to fall. "Why are you doing this? I'm your father, please tell me what's going on. It can't be like this." Diana took a deep breath, her eyes flickering for a moment as if a spark of emotion tried to break through her cold facade, but she quickly looked away, not allowing Rick to see any weakness. "This isn't about you, Dad. It's much bigger than you think." She glanced at the laptop where Arnold's DVD was ready to be played. "You shouldn't have gotten involved. Arnold, he tried to hide all of this, but now you're digging too deep. I can't let you continue." Rick felt the pain grow deeper. "Diana, I need to know. I need to understand what's happening. Arnold was trying to protect all of us, even you. What did he discover?" Diana slowly approached, standing face to face with Rick. "Arnold didn't know everything. He thought he was saving you, but he was just making things worse. And now, if you don't stop, you'll lose much more than you already have." She made another gesture, and one of the men pulled Benjamin up from the floor, pushing him closer to Rick. Benjamin's face showed determination despite the pain. Even in that situation, he was trying to protect Rick. "If you continue, Dad, they'll get rid of him. And after that, they'll come for you." Diana said it coldly, as if she had already accepted what needed to be done. "I don't want it to come to that. Please, stop now. For your sake. For mine." Rick looked at his daughter, struggling with the wave of despair that washed over him. There was love in his heart, but there was also a greater duty, a need to protect the truth and do what was right. But the thought of losing Benjamin, of losing even more, paralyzed him. "Diana, you still have a choice," Rick said, his voice breaking. "You don't have to go down this path. I'll help you. We can fix this together. Arnold wanted that. He believed in you." Diana's eyes wavered for a second, but she quickly composed herself, hardening her expression. "There's no choice left, Dad. It's up to you now." The room fell silent, heavy with tension. Rick looked at Benjamin, who was being held tightly by the men, his face marked with pain. Rick knew that any wrong decision could cost them all their lives, but he also knew that the truth needed to be revealed. Before he could think further, one of the men put a hood over Rick's head. "Lock him in this room and take this meddling security guard to our hideout. And you, Dad," Diana said in a grave voice, "I'll give you time to think about your actions. In a few hours, someone will come to release you. Use this time to reflect." Rick was shoved roughly into a small dark room, his hands tied tightly. The sound of the metal door slamming shut echoed through the space, and soon the darkness surrounded him. The air was heavy, damp, and the only sound he could hear was his own rapid, shaky breathing. The ropes dug into his wrists, cutting his skin, and the physical pain was only a fraction of the emotional torment he felt. Diana's betrayal still echoed in his mind. His own daughter had handed him over to these men, and now he was a prisoner, unable to fully understand what had happened or why. Every time he tried to think, his mind drifted back to Arnold. That name, that person he could barely remember but who seemed to be the key to everything. "Arnold," Rick murmured, his head hanging low, trying to find some connection between the fragmented memories. The notebook, the DVD, Diana's threats. Everything pointed to Arnold. But what did he mean to Rick? The hours dragged on. Rick was exhausted, his body weak from lack of movement and water. He could barely keep his eyes open, but the fear and uncertainty kept him on edge. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall outside. Rick lifted his head, tense, unsure of what to expect. The door creaked open. Two men entered quickly, their faces serious, and a third man followed closely behind. His eyes were different, more intense, as if he was there with a greater purpose. Rick blinked, confused, but soon shock took over. Shock. "Arnold?" Rick whispered in disbelief. The man nodded slightly, a mix of emotion and urgency in his eyes. He moved closer to Rick, pulling out a small knife from his pocket and quickly cutting the ropes that bound Rick's hands. "Yes, it's me, Rick," Arnold said, his voice low but full of intensity. "And I am your son." Rick blinked, still confused, his mind struggling to process the information. Arnold, the man he had forgotten for so long, was his son? He looked at Arnold, searching for any trace of memory in his face, something that connected him to the past. My son," Rick repeated, still in disbelief. "But why don't I remember? Why, Diana?" Arnold took a deep breath, knowing this wasn't the time for a full explanation. "I know your memory is confused, Dad. Diana is part of this too, but we don't have time now. I came to get you out of here. I know what's going on and I won't let them hurt you." Arnold signaled to the other men who were guarding the door. One of them gave a quick nod and started organizing their escape. They were ready to move. Rick looked at Arnold, his eyes filled with tears. Despite all the confusion, something inside him believed in this man. There was a familiarity, a comfort he couldn't explain, but the fear was still there. "And Diana?" Rick asked, his voice filled with pain. "She's involved in all of this. She betrayed me. How did this happen?" Arnold lowered his head for a moment, visibly touched by Rick's despair. "I know, Dad. Diana got involved in something too big for her. They manipulated her, used our weaknesses against us. She believed she had no other way out. But now things have gone too far." Rick looked at Arnold, his thoughts still clouded, but he knew somehow that Arnold was there to help him, to protect his family, as he had always tried to do. The weight of the revelation that Arnold was his real son was still heavy on him, but there was something more urgent to focus on now. "We need to get out of here before they come back," Arnold said, grabbing Rick's arm and helping him to his feet. Rick, still shaken, let Arnold guide him. Arnold's men started moving down the hallway, silently, as if they had planned every step. Arnold stayed by Rick's side the whole time, watching for any movement. As they walked through the dark corridors of the building, Rick couldn't help but ask, "How did you know I was here? How did you find me?" Arnold glanced at Rick quickly before continuing. "I've been watching you since you started investigating. I knew sooner or later Diana would make a move, and I was ready to step in. When I saw she was involved with these men, I knew things were getting dangerous. I had to get you out." Rick nodded, still processing everything. "And Diana, you'll help her too, won't you?" Arnold paused for a second, the pain clear on his face. "I'll try, Dad. But first, we need to get you out of here safely. Then we'll see what we can do for her." They continued down the hall until they reached a discreet exit. Outside, a black van was waiting with the engine running, ready for a quick getaway. Arnold placed a hand on Rick's shoulder, a firm but caring gesture. "We're almost out, Dad. Hang in there," Arnold said, his voice full of determination. Rick looked at his son, feeling a mixture of relief and pain. He had discovered that he had a son who loved him and was willing to protect him. But the cost of that discovery had been far too high. The black van sped through the empty streets, cutting through the silence of the early morning. Rick sat beside Arnold, his heart still racing. The cold night air slipped through the cracks in the windows, but what truly chilled Rick was the thought that his own daughter Diana was caught in this whirlwind. The weight of her betrayal mixed with the love he still felt for her. Arnold, driving, was focused, but kept an eye on his father, noticing the anguish on Rick's face. "Dad, I know this is hard. I didn't want things to get this far either, but we need to fix this now. If we let Diana continue down this path, there will be no turning back." Rick looked at Arnold, his eyes full of doubt and sadness. "But she's my daughter, our family. I still want to help her. If there's any chance to save her..." Arnold nodded, understanding. "I know. That's why we're bringing the police in. We can't do this alone. If we try to save her without help, the people behind her will stay in control." The van made a sharp turn and stopped in front of the building where Benjamin was being held captive. It was an old structure, similar to the storage unit they had been in earlier. Arnold pulled the handbrake and turned to Rick. "The police are already in position. They're going to raid the building and arrest everyone. But we need to make sure Diana is stopped before things get out of control. I don't want her to get hurt." Rick felt the weight of responsibility pressing on his chest. He knew this would be a crucial moment. They were close to solving the mystery, but the emotional cost would be high. Soon the sound of police sirens echoed in the distance, and Arnold signaled for the undercover officers to move in. The plan was clear. The police would storm the building, rescue Benjamin, and arrest the men who had held Rick and his friend captive. But most importantly, they had to detain Diana before she did something irreversible. "Let's go, Dad." Arnold helped Rick out of the van. "Stay close to me." Cautiously, they approached the building as the police team, fully equipped, positioned themselves for the raid. Rick stood back, watching everything unfold as if in slow motion. His heart was in two places at once, with Benjamin, who was in danger, and with Diana, his daughter, whom he still wanted to protect. "Now!" one of the officers shouted, and the team broke down the building's door. Within seconds, shouts echoed from inside, followed by the sound of running feet and doors being broken down. Arnold and Rick remained at a safe distance, watching as the police did their work. A few minutes later, the officers emerged, bringing Benjamin out with them. He was injured but still conscious. Seeing Rick, Benjamin gave a weak smile. "Took you long enough?" Benjamin joked, even in pain. Rick ran to him, emotional. I thought I'd never see you again." Tears welled up in Rick's eyes. "I said I'd stay with you, Rick, and that hasn't changed," Benjamin replied, with soft determination despite his weakened voice. As Benjamin was taken to the police car to receive medical care, Rick and Arnold watched as the rest of the team exited the building. Among the detainees was Diana, escorted by two officers. Her gaze was fixed on the ground, her face hardened, but there was a vulnerability in her posture, as if she finally understood what was happening. Rick stepped forward, feeling the weight of the moment in every fiber of his being. He wanted to shout, to ask why, to hold her and beg for everything to go back to normal. But he knew things had gone too far. "Diana!" Rick called, his voice breaking. She lifted her eyes, and for a brief moment her gaze met Rick's. There were tears in Diana's eyes, but there was also something deeper, something Rick couldn't fully understand. She was trapped in the consequences of her own choices, but in that second she seemed to regret it. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Rick felt her words cut through his heart. He wanted to forgive her, to believe that everything could be fixed, but he also knew things were now out of his control. Diana would be taken away, and justice would take its course. Arnold, standing next to Rick, placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "We did what we could, Dad. She'll have to face the consequences. But now, she's safe." Rick nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. He knew that, despite everything, Arnold was right. They had saved Diana from something far worse, and maybe in time, she could find a path to redemption. The police took Diana away while Rick, Arnold, and Benjamin stood in silence, watching the lights of the police cars fade into the night. There was a long road ahead, full of unanswered questions and broken hearts, but Rick knew that with time, he and his family, fractured as they were, could begin to rebuild. Days later, the courtroom was silent, except for the distant murmur of voices. Rick sat in the front row, his trembling hands resting in his lap. Beside him, Arnold and Benjamin remained steady. The last few days had been a whirlwind of emotions and painful revelations, and now, finally, the truth would be revealed. Diana sat in the defendant's seat, her gaze lowered, her hands clasped in her lap, as if trying to hide from it all. Her posture, once full of confidence and coldness, now seemed small, broken by the reality she had helped create. The judge, with a stern expression, waited for the confession, and everyone in the courtroom knew this was a pivotal moment. Rick could barely breathe. Seeing his daughter there, about to confess to something he never imagined, was like reliving an unbearable pain. He couldn't understand how things had gotten this far, how Diana, his daughter, had planned something so cruel. The defense attorney stood up, giving Diana a quick glance before addressing the judge. "Your Honor, my client has decided to confess her actions. She understands the seriousness of what she has done and wants to take full responsibility for her actions," said the attorney in a serious tone. The judge nodded slowly and looked directly at Diana. "Miss Diana, are you ready to confess your crimes before the court?" "Yes, I'm ready," she said, her voice filled with sadness. The judge indicated for her to begin, and Diana took another deep breath before speaking. I planned to deceive my father," she began. "I knew he had a fortune, that he was becoming more vulnerable as time went on, and She paused, as if the words were suffocating her. "I thought I could take advantage of that, use his condition to make sure I had access to the money." Rick closed his eyes for a moment, Diana's words hitting him hard. It was painful to hear. Knowing that his daughter, his own flesh and blood, had conspired to deceive him, to take everything he had, left him breathless. Arnold beside him placed a firm hand on his shoulder, a silent gesture of support. Diana continued, her voice now shaking as emotions began to show. "I didn't start this way. At first I just wanted to help. I wanted to be there. But the pressure, the debts, the people I got involved with." She shook her head, as if trying to find the right words. "I got lost, and by the time I realized I was too deep to turn back." She paused, her eyes finally meeting Rick's. There were tears in her eyes, reflecting the regret that had been missing for so long. "I let the money consume me. I thought if I controlled everything, life would be easier. But the cost was much greater than I imagined. I hurt you, Dad, Arnold, everyone who tried to help me." Diana swallowed hard, the tears now flowing freely down her face. "I can't undo what I've done, and I know I don't deserve forgiveness." Rick felt his chest tighten. Watching his daughter fall apart in front of everyone hurt him deeply. He had never wanted things to come to this point, never imagined he would see Diana in such a state. But despite everything, a father's love was stronger than any betrayal. The judge signaled for Diana to finish, but before concluding, she looked at Rick once more. "Dad," she said, her voice weak, almost pleading, "I'm so sorry. For everything." Rick didn't respond. He didn't know what to say. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He loved her, but the pain of her betrayal still burned in his chest. Arnold, sensing the weight of the moment, whispered softly to Rick, "It'll take time, Dad, but deep down, I think she wants to change. That's a start." Rick nodded, unable to say anything. Arnold's words brought some comfort, but he knew the path to healing would be long. The judge looked at everyone, let out a deep sigh, and finally announced that the sentence would be decided after further investigations, ending that part of the trial. The room slowly emptied while Rick remained seated, staring at the empty space where Diana had been. He knew that her confession was the beginning of something new, something painful, but perhaps necessary. And despite everything, he still hoped somehow that one day he could fully forgive her. After the trial, Rick and Arnold left the courthouse in silence, feeling the weight of what had just happened. But this time, something was different. Rick knew that although the process would be long and painful, he was no longer alone. He had Arnold by his side, the real son he barely remembered, but who now seemed like the only anchor amidst so much pain. They walked to a nearby park, looking for some fresh air and distance from the tense atmosphere. Rick sat on a bench, his body tired, and Arnold sat beside him. The sun was setting, and the shadows of the surrounding trees seemed to offer refuge for their weary minds. Rick looked at Arnold. The silence between them was comfortable, but at the same time, full of unspoken questions. He knew there was much to say, much to remember, but the words wouldn't come. The emptiness in his memory still tormented him, and Arnold's face, though familiar, seemed always just out of reach. "Arnold," Rick began, hesitantly, looking at the ground. I wish I could remember you. I wish I knew everything, all the moments we shared. But it feels like my mind won't let me." Arnold, his eyes fixed on the horizon, took a deep breath and gave a sad smile. "Dad, I know it's hard. I don't expect you to remember everything all at once. This process takes time. But I'm here, and I'll help you remember, one day at a time." Rick lifted his eyes, feeling a slight wave of relief. He knew Arnold was telling the truth, that he wouldn't be pressured to remember everything lost over time. Still, there was a deep sadness in knowing that his own son, whom he should have protected and loved for so many years, now felt like a stranger. "When I found out you were really my son, it felt like I'd been struck by lightning," Rick said, trying to find the right words. "I felt so lost, like my entire past was falling apart." Arnold nodded, understanding the depth of that feeling. "I was lost for a long time too. When you started forgetting, I tried to help, but..." He paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. "But then Diana got in the way. I couldn't let you be manipulated, even though she was family." Rick sighed. The name Diana still brought pain, but he knew the love for his daughter would never completely disappear. He looked at Arnold with tired eyes, but there was a spark of hope. "I've lost so much, Arnold. I've lost moments, memories, but I don't want to lose you now." Rick's voice trembled, full of emotion. "I want to try to remember. I want to try to hold on to what's left." Arnold smiled gently, encouragingly. "And you will. We've got time now, Dad. We don't need to rush. We can do this together." Rick closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the light breeze on his face. He knew that the journey to regain his memory would be long and full of challenges, but for the first time in a long while, he wasn't afraid. He knew that with Arnold by his side, he'd have the strength to face whatever came. Arnold reached into his pocket and placed something gently in Rick's hand. It was a small, old photograph, yellowed with age. In it, Rick and Arnold were together, on a sunny day, smiling at a picnic from years ago. The image brought a sudden warmth to Rick's heart. "This," Rick murmured, looking carefully at the photo. "I remember this day, I think I do. We were at the park, right?" Arnold smiled, excited. "Yes. You taught me how to fly a kite that day. It was the first time I got it to fly high. I remember you laughed so hard when it got stuck in a tree." Rick smiled, his eyes filling with tears. The memory was faint, like a distant dream, but it was there. It was a start, a small piece of the puzzle beginning to fit together. I think I'm starting to remember some things," Rick said with a hopeful smile. "Not everything, but it's a start." Arnold nodded, gently touching his father's shoulder. "That's right, Dad, one step at a time, and I'll be with you every step of the way." For the first time in a long time, Rick felt like he could rebuild what he had lost. He looked at Arnold, his son, and knew that together they would make it. The road ahead would be long, but with love and patience, they would find their way. As the days passed, Rick felt that little by little life was beginning to regain its color. The weight of what had happened with Diana still lingered, always in the background, but he had something he never thought he'd have again: hope. With Arnold and Benjamin by his side, he started to rebuild his life piece by piece, anchored by the love and support these two men gave him. One afternoon, Rick sat in Arnold's backyard. The sun shone softly, and the fresh breeze stirred the trees around him. He watched as Arnold and Benjamin talked about the house renovation they were working on, laughing at old jokes that Rick was still trying to remember. Though his memory faltered, he felt included, part of something bigger than any forgotten past. Arnold approached with a smile, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Here you go, Dad. I know you like it with just a little sugar." Rick smiled as he took the cup. "Thanks, son. It seems you know more about me than I do myself." Arnold laughed lightly and sat beside him. "Don't worry, Dad. Everything you don't remember, I'll tell you, and I'm sure little by little more will come back." Rick looked down at the cup, a bit thoughtful. "You know, until recently I couldn't even remember the taste of coffee. But now—" He took a sip, feeling the bitter yet comforting flavor. "Now, it seems like things are starting to come back. Slowly, but they're coming." Benjamin, who was nearby painting a wall, stopped and looked at Rick with a pleased smile. "That's a good sign, Rick. I told you, with time, everything would start to fall into place. We just needed a little patience, and look at that, you're even starting to enjoy real coffee again." Rick laughed, feeling lighter than he had in months. He knew there was still a long road ahead, but the support from Arnold and Benjamin made all the difference. The house around him, which Arnold had been renovating, seemed like the perfect symbol of this moment in his life, a reconstruction that required time, effort, and above all, love. "You know, Benjamin," Rick said, turning to him, "when all of this started, I thought I wouldn't survive losing my memory. It felt like the world had turned against me. But you showed me that I wasn't alone." Rick looked at Arnold, his eyes full of gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you for that." Benjamin put down his paintbrush and came over, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Oh, Rick, you don't need to thank us. That's what friends are for, right? Besides, after everything we've been through, I'd say we're all stronger for it." Arnold, sitting beside Rick, smiled and nodded. "Dad, you're not alone. You never were from the start. I knew it would be hard, but I also knew you were strong enough to face all of this. And now, here we are, together." Arnold paused, looking around as if to appreciate the moment. "We're rebuilding everything, and that includes our family." Rick felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He looked at the house, at Arnold and Benjamin, and realized that despite the losses and challenges, he still had something valuable. A second chance. A chance to reconnect with his son, to continue with his friend, and perhaps one day to rebuild his relationship with Diana. "I don't know if I'll ever remember everything," Rick said softly. "But I know that with you by my side, I'll be able to move forward." Arnold placed a warm hand on Rick's shoulder, smiling. "That's what matters. We don't need to remember everything to move forward. What's important is what we do now. And right now, you're here, with me, with Benjamin. That's already a huge victory." Benjamin nodded, crossing his arms and looking at Rick with that gleam of friendship in his eyes. "And over time, we'll make new memories, Rick. And who knows, maybe some old ones will come back too. But even if they don't, what matters is that you're living in the present, and there's nothing more precious than that." Rick smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. He knew that the healing process would be slow, that his memories were still scattered like leaves in the wind, but he also knew that with Arnold's and Benjamin's love, he had everything he needed to keep going. The future didn't seem so scary anymore. With the right people by his side, he felt like he could face anything. And more importantly, he could keep living, creating new memories, and perhaps one day, rediscovering the old ones. Rick's birthday had finally arrived. The sun shone brightly in the sky, and a gentle breeze rustled through the trees in the yard where the party was about to begin. Arnold and Benjamin had spent days organizing everything, preparing the space with simplicity and care, because they knew this day wasn't just an ordinary celebration. It was a symbol of Rick's resilience, his strength, and the journey that had brought them to this moment. In the center of the yard, a table was set with a cake decorated with candles and simple decorations. The chairs around it were filled with the few people who mattered most to Rick. It wasn't a big party, but it was exactly what he needed, an intimate moment, surrounded by love and support. Rick, sitting in the shade of a tree, looked around with a calm smile. Every detail of the party, from the arranged chairs to the cake with his name carefully written on it, seemed to carry deep meaning. He knew this day marked more than just his birthday. It was proof that despite everything he had faced, memory loss, betrayal, pain, he was still here, and somehow he felt whole again. Arnold approached, bringing a cold drink for Rick. He sat next to his father with a quiet smile on his face. "Happy birthday, Dad," Arnold said softly, handing him the glass. Rick took the drink and sipped it, feeling the fresh taste bring him comfort. "Thank you, son." He looked around, seeing people chatting and laughing, and felt warmth in his chest. "I never thought I'd live to see this day, you know." Arnold looked at Rick, his eyes full of affection. "I always knew you would make it, Dad. Even when things seemed tough, I knew you were stronger than you thought." Rick smiled, reflecting on everything he had been through. "I wouldn't have made it here without you. You and Benjamin gave me something I didn't know I needed, a second chance." He paused, taking a deep breath. "When I lost my memories, I thought I'd lost everything. But now I see that the most important thing is still here with you." Benjamin, who had been chatting with other guests, overheard his name and walked over with a big grin on his face. "Talking about me," he said, pretending to be modest as he joined them. Rick laughed, gesturing for Benjamin to sit with them. "I was just saying how lucky I am to have a friend like you, Benjamin." Benjamin sat down and gave Rick a friendly pat on the shoulder. "Oh, Rick, you've been through so much. If anyone deserves this moment, it's you, and besides, I wouldn't miss a party with cake for the world." They all laughed, and the sound of their laughter echoed through the yard in a light and genuine way. It was exactly the kind of celebration Rick needed, no grand speeches or formalities, just the warmth of those who truly cared. Arnold looked at Rick, his eyes softening with a mix of pride and love. "This birthday isn't just about the time that's passed, Dad. It's about everything you've achieved. Every little step you've taken to recover, to keep going, has been a victory." Rick looked at his son, feeling the words deeply. He knew Arnold was right. Every day, every memory regained, every new experience he had embraced was part of his struggle. He still didn't remember everything, but he didn't need to. What he had now, with Arnold and Benjamin, was enough. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm grateful for where I am now," Rick said with a sincere smile. "It doesn't matter what the past still hides from me. The present with you two is all I need." Arnold smiled and stood up. "Well, I think it's time to blow out the candles," Benjamin agreed enthusiastically. "Let's go, Rick. I want to see you make a big wish." Rick was led to the table where the cake was waiting, the candles flickering in the breeze. All the guests gathered around, and Arnold placed a firm hand on Rick's shoulder, while Benjamin, with his usual excitement, encouraged everyone to sing. The song filled the air, and for a moment Rick felt time slow down. He looked at the people around him, at the cake, at the glow in Arnold's eyes, and realized that the moment was perfect. When the song ended, he leaned over the cake and with a smile on his face blew out the candles. "So what did you wish for?" Benjamin asked, curious, with a mischievous glint in his eyes. Rick looked at both Arnold beside him and Benjamin standing in front of him, then shrugged with a peaceful smile. "I think everything I could wish for is already right here." And in that instant, As laughter echoed through the yard and the sun began to set, Rick felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Peace. Peace in knowing that despite the hardships, he had overcome them. Peace in knowing that Arnold's love and Benjamin's friendship were the anchors that kept him steady. And most of all, peace in realizing that the future, however uncertain, was full of new opportunities. So we've reached the end of this story. If you've made it this far, please leave your thoughts in a comment, share what you thought of the story or what you learned from it. And I'll leave you here with a few more stories that I'm sure you'll love.